You can start probably if you're on the time.
I might actually sit and have a conversation.
Better.
Cool. This makes me feel a little.
Aspia, thanks for coming.
Of course, yeah. I'm glad you got in touch with Dr. B.
Yeah, me too.
Well, Tasvia, you're like my Achilles heel. If anybody else had come to me, I would have said no. He said Tasvia, and I said, that's also.
Because I remember talking to you about, you were telling me how you think of math as very similar to religion, like the concept
It's a faith, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
faith, yeah.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Yep.
So
You want me to start?
whenever you like
So
to start.
let's start by actually asking the question, who has a faith here? You don't have to tell me what it is, or who has a faith? And I'll put my hand up, okay? All right, so we all have some form of faith. Do you think my faith matches Tasvia's?
Yes and no.
Okay. That's probably the right answer. So do you think any two people can have the same faith?
Yeah, I say yes and no again.
Okay. All right, so this to me is an open question, I think. Can two people have the same faith? Two people can have the same religion. Absolutely. Can two people have the same faith? And so I'm not going to answer that question, but maybe what we talk about today will help guide you in answering that question. Okay? So math and faith. I am a mathematician. I am a person of faith. Full disclosure, I'm a person who struggles with faith on a daily basis. So some days I have strong faith, some days I have weak faith, and some days I have no faith. So what am I doing here? I am going to show you how my journey as a woman of faith has been actualized by being a woman in mathematics, and in how it has supported my faith. So this is probably different than any other sort of approach, because most people use the sciences to disprove faith. For me, throughout my entire existence, my internal systems, my internal intellect, whatever you want it to be, has gone through periods of less faith and no faith. And being a woman of science has deepened my faith. It has brought me back to faith. And so that might seem dichotomous to what you would think, right? That I'm fighting the science, and in fact, the science is what always has brought me back to faith. Okay, so we're going to be talking about faith and math a lot, and I'm not really here to talk about God, but it's hard to talk about faith without talking about God. So we're actually going to talk about God an awful lot, even though that's not my intent. But the result where we end up is going to be about faith, and the God part is really not going to be as relevant as your faith in God is. All right. Okay. So here's the first question we have to answer when we start talking about faith and math. Oops. This worked a minute ago.
Sometimes I need a little help.
Ah.
All right, does it work now?
Let's try. Did I turn it off? Let me try turning it off and on again. I was pressing the wrong way. It's not intuitive. Okay, so the first thing is mathematics. Let's just think about mathematics. Is it something that human beings invent? We sort of artificially, create it. We put these things together and say, okay, that's math. Or is it something we discover? What do I mean by that? It means it's out there in the world. The universe is math, and we discover it existing out there in the universe. What do you think? Do we invent it? We sort of just make it up and it works and it's cool to some people and terrifying to others? Or is it out there in the universe and we discover it?
I think math is, it's a relationship between a human mind and nature.
Okay. That's quite lovely.
I think it's discovered.
You think it's discovered? Anybody think it's invented? We just sort of make it up? Because somewhere along the line, somebody taught you 1 + 1 is 2. gave you no reason why that should be true, right? Just told you that, you learned it, you memorized it, and you used it the rest of your life. And you just use that to learn that 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, and so on and so forth, right? So did we just make that up and it all made sense and it all kind of connected, or does this concept exist out there in the world? And there's two trains of thought. I mean, one train of thought is that it's all artificial. Like it's just all artificial. We just made it up. It all works. It helps explain the world, but the world's not giving it to us. Like we're creating this language to explain the world. And that's valid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's valid. The other train of thought, and it sounds like you're on this train, and I kind of am too, is that the world is beautiful and the world is mathematical and everything in it is somehow related to math, and we sort of trip over it and we see it. And mathematicians for a long time have debated this, and I think there may be two kinds of math. There's kind of the math that we artificially make and we build some rules and we say, okay, this is how this is going to work, and now let's build a universe around that. And then there's math that just is out there in the world. We see it. There's no way to escape the fact that it's mathematical, and we are like explorers. We're the discoverer of it. And I always use this analogy to explain the two differences. I can be in a conference, sitting in the back, kind of hiding, and the person in front of the room teaching will present some new math. Yes, we are still doing new math. It is still happening, right? People are doing research on new things every day. And you listen, and sometimes you're like, oh, that's kind of neat. Look at what they just did. That's neat. Look at how that worked out so nicely. That's really neat. And there's other times you watch a presentation and you go, wow, that's beautiful. Look at that. That is just beautiful. And I don't know, when I say that, I almost get chills because that's how we interact with math. Somebody shows you how to do a math problem, it's neat, but you discover something that you never noticed before about how numbers interact, and you're like, oh, wow, that's beautiful. And so in my brain, I always thought the neat stuff we made up, and it's just kind of cool, it works. And the beautiful stuff is part of the universe, and we discovered it. But the problem is, there has never been a moment in history where the stuff we look at as neat hasn't eventually become beautiful. And when that happens, it's because we found an application for it, right? So a quick example of this, back in the 50s, the 40s even, there were a bunch of mathematicians sitting in a room doing something called knot theory. They were tying knots in rope, and they were writing an equation of it. You may have even seen a talk about this at one point. That's all they were doing. They were tying a knot and trying to describe the knot with a function. Very complicated function, but a function. No purpose at all. All of a sudden, biologists got a hold of this research and said, that looks like a DNA strand. If you can describe a knot with math, I can describe DNA. And oh, by the way, if I can break a knot using math, maybe I can fix a knot using math. Right? And if that knot's DNA, now maybe we can cure some diseases. So this math that went from being neat, isn't that cool? There are a bunch of sailors there tying knots, right? Doing the math, all of a sudden became beautiful. So this is why I lean towards math exists and we discover it. And there's another point. How many of you have heard of the Pythagorean theorem? Okay, who discovered the Pythagorean theorem?
Well, it is technically.
Oh, no, I don't want the math answer. If I just ask somebody on the street who discovered the Pythagorean theorem, here's the Pythagorean theorem, right? Here's your triangle, and it says a squared, the leg, plus b squared. The leg has to equal c squared. This is hanging in my office 24/7. So the math student's going to have a different answer. But if I ask somebody on the street who discovered the Pythagorean theorem, what are people going to say? Pythagoras, yes, Pythagoras. But what's the math answer? Do you know the math? I mean, do you know? I cut you off thinking that you knew.
Well, no, I was just gonna say that he took claim to it even though he didn't discover it.
He did not discover it. It was actually known by the Babylonians 1,000 years before. It was known by the ancient Chinese civilization 1,500 years before. It was probably known by the Mayans 1,000 years before. And it was proven in some form by each of these civilizations, not the Mayans. They did not have a proof of it. We're not even positive they knew it, but their architecture suggests that it does. Indian mathematicians proved it before Pythagoras, right? So 3 civilizations knew it, proved it before Pythagoras. And but they all did it independently, right? So Pythagoras didn't say, oh, let me peek and see what the Babylonians did, right? And then proved it and then claimed it, right? The Babylonians didn't look at what the ancient Chinese civilization did and took credit for it. They all did it independently, right? So what does that say to you? This thing existed, right? It existed because we all discovered it, different civilizations, different times, nothing common, right? In terms of the need. And yet they all did it, they discovered it independently. So that's why I think math was probably discovered when we think about math. Okay, so here's this idea about beauty versus neat. Fibonacci created a sequence that just looks like adding successive numbers. It's 1 + 1 gives you 2. It looks like this real quick. I keep saying real quick, but it's going to be a much longer talk than I intended. It looks like this: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Any idea what comes next? 8. You add the 2 previous numbers to get the next. 2 previous numbers get the next. 2 previous numbers get the next. How's your addition?
13.
13. Awesome. That's it. Came up with a sequence. By the way, Fibonacci lived before our decimal system existed. All right, long, long time ago. He invented this sequence. It bears his name forever. It is everywhere in nature. All of these things that you see are explained by way of a spiral that spans out by this ratio of the Fibonacci sequence. Right. So that's again why I think math is discovered. Oh, so let's go back to God. All right. So we can't just talk about math here. We're supposed to talk about faith. Is God invented or discovered?
Discovered.
Right. And there's no right answer. I'm not here to proselytize, right? Do human beings invent God because we need God? Because there's something in our life missing and we need to just define him? Or does he exist and we discover God? This is a question. This is something that each of us has to decide for ourselves. Right? We have to figure out within ourselves, am I creating this, right? Because I have a need? Or is this something in the universe that I am drawn to, not because of me, but because of this being, right? Which way does that direction go? And again, I'm not here to answer these questions for you. I'm here to give you the questions and have you think about them. But it is a valid question. And just like with math, where we don't really have an answer that I could say, or I can't, just claim one way or the other. But each of us can come to our own understanding and our own belief structure with regards to that. All right. So math is perfect. God is perfect. Otherwise, it makes no sense, right? It doesn't make sense. We're not going to have faith in something that's not perfect. Math is perfect. You all agree?
It's complete, right?
So yeah, I mean, what you mean by complete? I don't know, because we're still discovering math. We're still proving things that have never been proved before. So it's kind of an interesting question. Is it complete? I don't think so. Is it perfect?
No. If it's not complete, then it couldn't be perfect either.
So it's not perfect, right? Let me give you a theorem in math. Maybe you guys know it. I'm so curious to know. Don't answer. The sum of the interior angles in a triangle have to be what? Does anyone know? Do you know what they have to add to? What is it?
180.
180, awesome. Okay, so the interior angles of a triangle have to add to 180. Not going to prove it, but it's true. Absolutely true. For every triangle. I don't care which one you draw, always true. Except, is it true? Because I drew this one with my mouse, right? I drew this one with my mouse. This one looks pretty good. I actually did not a bad job here, but I messed up there terribly. And this one's not great, right? Are these really 180? Me drawing it, because the only way I can interact with math is with my imperfection. I'm a human being. right? I can't draw that perfectly. So is math perfect if I can't actually ever draw a perfect triangle? And even here, I used, paint, on the PowerPoint. And so I use this perfect, draw a triangle, drag. But is it true with that? Not really, because this line has depth. And so that line, when I draw it, whether I use a Sharpie or a fine point, no matter what, that's going to cut into my degree measure. I can't ever make a triangle in which that is true. Can't do it. On here, right? On here with these hands, I can't do it. So where is that true? Right? Where is the theorem, the sum of the interior angles equals 180? Where is that true?
A triangle that already exists in nature.
But even in nature, right? Nature could create it. Like if I took this picture frame, right, and cut it here, could nature do it? The world only exists in the mind. Perfection. Not that it exists everywhere, but the perfection of math only exists cerebrally. That's it, right? All right, so now let's talk about God. We are imperfect beings trying to describe perfect God. Does that work here?
Human description wouldn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Where does God exist then?
Our mind.
Well, I want to be careful because I don't want to say it's all in our mind.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that. But it's on a plane that we don't interact with, right? Because I don't ever want to say, oh, it's all in your head. That's never what I want to say. But so here is something I've always sort of struggled with faith very personally. Faith for me has been a journey. I don't have exactly the same faith I had when I was a little girl, as I had when I was a young adult, as I had now 54, right? It's always been a journey, and I tell you, it's been a journey. But I meet people who have exactly the same faith from the day they've discovered a faith until now. And I always think to myself, they could look at me and say, your faith is weak. I could look at them and say, you couldn't possibly have had it figured out. Because there's no way to figure out God, right? We couldn't possibly. If I could fully understand God, he would have to be imperfect. Couldn't do it. I don't have the tools as an imperfect human to fully understand God. And so that, to me, again, this is all from my perspective out, and you can investigate it in your own hearts. Unless faith is changing and growing, and growth doesn't always mean upward, to me, that's not faith, right? That faith has to continue to evolve. Okay, again, that's me. That's how I look at it. That's my experience with it. That's how I interact with this idea of a perfect God.
Very nice, Professor.
All right. So we talk about defining God. I said describing God. Could we describe God? Mathematics is built on definitions. That's it. It's built on definitions. We define things, and then we use them based on their defined characteristic. So if I were to pull this whole thing out here, right, and I asked you, what is this called? What would you say?
Chair.
It's a chair. How do we know it's a chair?
Because everyone calls it a chair.
Because everyone calls it a chair. That's it, right? This is a chair because everybody calls it a chair. So I'm going to show you my favorite children's book. It's amazing how much of my life, I still read this to my youngest daughter, who's not so little, she's 14. We still read this. It's a book called This Is a Ball. All right, so let's see. That's it. This is a ball. Okay, and in this book, it requires you to know definitions. All right, so let's go to the first page for a second. Let us show you this real quick. Okay, so is this a triangle?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a cat?
No.
What is this?
Banana.
That's interesting. Okay. So this is a ball.
No.
Yes, that's a ball. Yeah, just look a little closer. You can see it's a ball. Just look closer. And this is a dog. You can tell it's a dog because it has legs and a tail. You can tell. This is a bike. See the wheels? See the wheels? It's a bike. Yeah. And this is, of course, is a blue bike. All right, so we'll skip to the end. This is a pretty princess, right? So if we kind of, skip around, we have a beach, that beautiful beach. And a kite. And this one's obviously a kite because it has a string.
Just pointing out that language is social agreements or that it's ill-defined.
That it's a social agreement.
Social agreement.
Yeah. So here, what do we have? We have a pretty princess flying her kite at the beach with her pet dog. Obviously, right? Obviously. So let's turn to the very last page of this book. You see, here we have a scary monster telling a story about a pretty princess who's flying a kite on her beach with their pet dog while standing on a cube. On a cube. Now, how do you know it's a cube? Because that's a ball. Right? Yeah. All right. So why do I tell you this? Mathematics is about definitions. We start with definitions. We define objects. So let's talk about God. Not my God, not even necessarily your God. What are some of the names for God?
Jesus, Allah, Krishna, Yahweh, so many names, Buddha.
Okay. All right. Somebody who doesn't believe in God, what might they call God?
The universe.
The universe.
Mother Nature.
Mother Nature. I don't believe in God. They may believe in karma. Right? I don't believe in God, but I believe in karma. Right? Do they believe in God?
In a way, yeah.
Well, it gets to what the book is trying to point out. What is their understanding of that term?
Yeah. Yeah. Right? I believe in fate, but I don't believe in God. These are words that we've given definitions to, but there are concepts behind those words that either have some agreement, because in my question that I asked, do we all have the same God? There may be some agreement in how we talk about Jesus versus God. Right? There may be some agreement. There may be no agreement. Right? But it's something, if we are human beings interacting in some way with God, we have to come up with our own definition of what God is. Is God love? Is God judgment? What is God, right? So all of these things are very, very mathematical, because in mathematics, we can do nothing without a defined object. And so as we talk about faith, having that connection to understand that if we believe God exists, and we believe that we can't ever perfectly know God because we're imperfect, and yet we define God, I say this with absolute clarity, I can't possibly define God for you. And you can't possibly define God for me. And so one of the things I've struggled with my whole life has been formal religion. I was raised in I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I will. I was raised in a very strict fundamentalist Baptist church. And I struggled with the strictures of that my whole life because most of what was preached was contradictory. I struggled with it. It was until I was a mathematician that I was able to separate faith from religion. It was my first time that I really understood that faith and religion are different things. The act of having faith and the act of practicing a religion are different. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't, excuse me, actively participate in a religion. I do. I found a religion that most closely supports what I believe, but it's not a perfect fit. Right? It helps me in my faith, but it also stunts me because it doesn't fit perfectly. And so I just think all of that, if you are somebody in faith, there's some grace that we need to give ourselves in understanding that these are different concepts.
Well, can I say
Yeah,
one thing?
anytime.
So a lot of what you're pointing out too is that there's a shared experience for all of us. And now we might have different ways of describing it, but the fact that we can come to a social agreement about what a ball is or a cube is.
That's right.
So that kind of.
So faith, the
It can't just be
religion
an
part.
individual. It's not just like, oh, my way, and if people disagree with me, that's all right as long as I'm in my lane. That, that kind of abstraction from a social community or an agreeable, not being agreeable, that kind of messes the whole dynamic up.
That's right.
So
if we all together decided that this was a ball, we would be completely ostracized from the rest of the world, right? So we might need to come to the conclusion that we were wrong, right? And I think that is part of how faith grows, is because of the community around faith, that we have our own sort of views, and then they're in contrast to those around us. And sometimes we're convinced, and sometimes it makes our faith stronger, that we can see the contradiction in their faith, or we can see the fact that it's not how we view God. So I think religion is community, and our faith is tied to religion. I mean, it is, of course. But it's, to me anyway, faith is bigger than religion. That I can go to a church, I can interact with people who have similar models of faith, but I have a personal faith that is different than what is perfectly preached, or that's the wrong word, but precisely preached from the pulpit. And what that does for me is give me more openness to other people's religion. So when I sit in church, I worship on a Sunday. When I sit in church, I am not sitting in that church saying I'm right and somebody who's not in my church is wrong. Instead, I am saying this is how I understand God, and this is what supports my relationship with God. And I believe that other people can believe in God and have a different approach to worshiping and understanding God.
Well, I think that I agree that religion and faith are separate and different. I believe that faith is your relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
So that relationship can look different across different people and different, beliefs, or that also goes into what you talked about before, the triangle not ever being perfectly done by human hands.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a difference between human understanding and godly wisdom.
Yeah.
Right. So that goes into your faith and relationship with God and what you're taught by your God or what you believe being different than your own human understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that exactly captures what I'm trying to say, if I didn't say it well. Yeah.
Also, the fact that all these different religions fall under the category of religion means that no matter what the differences are in their perspectives of the worship of God,
we're still doing the same thing.
It's still, the concept of God is so universal that it can harmonize all those different perspectives to some extent that they fall under a similar category of this is religion,
That's right.
right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's that is what binds that's the commonality that binds us, right? When you think about what we have fought wars over,
Yeah.
over centuries, right? We fight it over money, we fight it over power, we fight it over land, and we fight it over religion. And how unbelievably, strange and foreign that feels, because there should be more that sort of binds us than what tears us apart when it comes to religion.
Even as you look like across religions, whether or not you believe in God or Allah or Buddha, whatever you believe, or karma, whether you believe in God or not, humans innately are looking for the answers. So that leads me to believe that humans are born with a God knowledge, or like looking for that answer of an innate God knowledge, a reason to explain the things that we don't know, right? And that also ties into
That's my next slide right there. See that? Yeah, that's exactly my next slide. It's to bring answers to things we don't understand, right? There's a lot of people who say that's the purpose of God. If we think that, we're the sort of ones being drawn to this, and whether it's innate or whether it's through experience. But there's a lot of people who say that's really why God is part of society, and what we go looking for this concept is to bring order to disorder. And that is absolutely the purpose of math, right? The purpose of math is to bring order to disorder. And so, for example, right, on the surface, that looks really disordered, but of course we can all immediately see the order in it, right? And if you don't see the order in that, I'll take, it's the same similar picture, I guess. These are called fractals. This is the same sort of spiraling kind of technique, but if you were to build little, these are all based on the Pythagorean theorem. So these triangles, see that? There it is right there. C squared, A squared, B squared, C squared, right? And that would create what looks disordered and yet is actually very, very ordered, right? So mathematics' purpose is really to create order out of disorder, or not create it, but recognize the order that may look disorder, right? And so again, this exists. We don't have to just, this isn't just a computer generated thing. These are things that actually exist in nature. If I went back to the Fibonacci slide, you would see that spiral. And so the argument of, well, we just made up God. We just made him up because we needed order and the world doesn't make sense. So we needed a God to explain the fact that it doesn't make sense to us. It's a faulty argument, because there's many things in life that seem disordered and yet are extremely well ordered. And that can very well be what we think of when we think of God.
In line with that point, I mean, the United States of America, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation under God, right? So the concept of God is so powerful as an organizing force that it can take all these disgruntled rebels from Britain and have them, we're trying to, because of religion, pursuing freedom of religion was a big part of the founding of the country. So that was such a strong force that all these people could come together and form something that would become America. So that's definitely
it's very much a unifying source. Yeah. And if you think of math in the same way, that's how we get these sort of different branches of mathematics, by agreeing to certain rules or agreeing to certain definitions and building it based on that. And that's where we're going to kind of settle. I want to do one more thing about faith, and in terms of people who attempt to discredit faith. They will bring up paradoxes. Right? So they'll say, in faith, could God create a rock so big that he couldn't lift it? So I've heard this my whole life from people who don't believe in God, right? It's a paradox. Can God create a rock so big that he can't lift it? Well, if God can do anything, he can create the rock. But if he created that rock, then he couldn't lift it, which means he can't do everything, right? It's a paradox, right? It's a silly little riddle, but it's a paradox. God, that it makes no sense. You can't have either of those happening. But in math, we have many, many paradoxes, and we still consider it to be this sort of perfectly described system. So I'm going to show you one. Well, first of all, if I were to draw 2 points on the board and I ask you what's the shortest distance between 2 points? You've probably heard this your whole life. What's the shortest distance between 2 points?
Straight line.
Straight line. Not true. This is an axiom. It's something we accept is true in Euclidean geometry, meaning sort of two-dimensional geometry. Even three-dimensional we can get away with, right? But in actuality, it's an axiom. An axiom is something we accept as truth without proving it, right? We don't prove it. So if we think about, so let me go ahead for a little bit. Oh, actually, let me stick with paradoxes. God, I was on there. Okay. So here's a mathematical paradox. I'm going to come back to this. Sorry. This is called Gabriel's horn. It is something we can draw. It's infinite. Gabriel was the angel in Christianity. This tail goes on forever, and the tail approaches 0 if you were to graph this. This horn has infinite surface area, infinite because it goes on forever, but it actually has finite volume. And it's a Calc 2 problem. So Tasvia, you could do this. It's a Calc 2 problem.
Oh, yeah.
You can just use 1 over x, and you can use some of the Calc 2 stuff, and you can show that this thing has infinite surface area because it goes on forever. But if it goes on forever, shouldn't it have infinite area? I mean, volume? Infinite volume?
No, if it.
It never stops.
It just cuts off though, like on the.
It doesn't cut off. It goes forever. Yeah, it goes forever. Across Lake Fred, to my house, to wherever, like forever. So it has infinite surface area, but it has finite volume. That's a paradox, okay? It's a paradox. So when people try to use that argument with me that God is paradoxical, math disproves that that's a problem. It's not a problem. We can have paradoxes and still have sort of perfect information. It's not a problem. Okay, so here's what I want to get to. This is the big one. Can you just go forward?
Yeah.
Pick up first. All right. Math requires proof. That's simple. Math is the only science where we have to prove something is true. Not do enough experiments that we believe it, not show within a certain error that nothing goes wrong. Math is the one science that we have to prove. Can you prove God? I'm going to answer for you. You cannot. But can you disprove God? Could somebody come to me and say, I can disprove that God exists? No, you cannot. So there are things in math that are not provable, but also not unprovable. And these are things we call axioms. These are things we accept as truth and we build our world around. So the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's an axiom. Because if I'm flying around the globe, this is a different type of geometry. It's no longer just, flat. Now you have to fly on a great circle to get there the closest, right? This is a different type of geometry. We have hyperbolic geometry. That would be called spherical geometry. And the definition of a straight line changes because it matches what we need. So what I believe, and let me show you one other axiom that we take in math. We take this as an axiom. It only works in Euclidean geometry. All right. So let me say I have a bunch of drawers or a bunch of boxes, and in each box I have a bunch of ping pong balls. I'm not going to tell you how many, but I have some in each box. Can I reach in, theoretically, I don't have 17 hands, but theoretically, could I reach in and take a ball out of each box? Theoretically, yes, right? We all agree this. I have, 6 boxes. They all have ping pong balls. I can reach in and take out a ball, theoretically, right? If I had had 7 hands. Let's say I know there's infinitely many balls in each. Could I theoretically reach in and pick out a ball?
Yeah, it doesn't change.
Doesn't change it. Okay. So what if I had, infinitely many balls?
I didn't even see you put that in there. Did you come here before
I
us?
came over early. Infinitely many balls
Wow.
in infinitely many drawers. So now you just have to work up here because we don't have infinitely anything, right? But let's say I take all these balls and I now have infinitely many drawers and infinitely many balls in each drawer. Theoretically, can I reach into each drawer and pick out a ball?
You have an infinite number of hands.
Okay, yeah, we'll make that concession. Okay. This is something that can't be proven true. We all think it makes sense, right? But it also can't be proven false. Can't prove it. It's called the axiom of choice. And it is something, it's not an open question. People say, oh, it just hasn't been proven yet. We have a proof that says it can't be proven true, and we have a proof that shows you can't prove it false. It is something you have to either accept and build your world around, or discard and say, I do not believe this. Okay? So, what is God? Quite simply, it's an axiom. Right? We decide if I have faith in God, nobody can prove that wrong. And by the way, nothing I believe can then contradict that. Okay? Because my faith supports everything from there on out.
Your point of view becomes your faith.
Yes. That one axiom, nobody can argue any part of my faith because it's built on an axiom, whether you accept my axiom or not, that is what God is. So we as people of faith are doing mathematics every single time, right? Every single time we are basing our belief structure on the axiom of God. And once you accept that, nobody can counter it. Right? That's why you should never get into an argument about God or faith. It's meaningless. If their axiom is that there is no God and your axiom is that there is a God, you can't exist in the same plane, right? And so in this axiom of choice, there are mathematicians who accept it and they build work around it. And there are mathematicians who look at that work and say that's garbage because you use the axiom of choice. Well, in their mathematical world, everything they did was legitimate and perfect and intertwined. And in this person's view of their work, it was meaningless. And so part of faith is being strong enough as a human being to understand that this is axiomatic and it's yours, right? No one can take that from you. That's my talk.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I ran way over, I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm happy you did. Does anyone have any questions?
No,
Anybody?
not really questions.
Or anything to add?
In the beginning, when you were talking about religion, and I was thinking, like, in the back of my head, I was gonna say that, like, the way I know God is what he says about himself through his words that we have in a book, and he promised that it will be preserved and nobody can change it. But that also falls under, like, the axiom. Someone can choose to not, like, someone can choose to reject it.
They can reject that those are the words of God.
Yeah.
Right. So I know, like, in my religion, I'm Christian. And so, the Bible, and there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, and some people who will reject the New Testament and only the Old Testament. And there are people who are Christians who will only take as pure in their faith the words of Jesus, right? And that anything else that may have been written is fallible because it was written by humans. Then you have to get into this cycle of what Jesus' words were written down, scribed by human beings.
Right.
So, I mean, I think there's many layers to that. But again, I think you have created a mechanism by which you will support your faith based on how God describes himself.
Yeah,
You get to do.
yeah. I would also like to think it's pretty intuitive because I know that God created me and I don't know, like in whatever I do, I think I have that gut feeling in the back of my head that like if somebody came up to me and argued about something, I would still know what I believe in my heart.
And I think that's important. I think especially as you get older, being able to think about it as a very personal thing is what creates that strength in your belief.
I wanted to present something about calling God an axiom rather than calling faith in God an axiom.
So I guess I would say it in its purest sense, I would probably call faith in God
Faith in God.
the axiom. Yes, I will agree with you there.
Because then someone who's a theist and their belief is that God is the concept of what is most fundamental and everything rests on that absolute foundation. So if we wanted to say then if God was an axiom, then we have to also be able to say, well, then a human being is an axiom, a tree is an axiom, right? Because then anything that depends on that axiomatic foundation can't be anything greater than an axiom. So if we don't consider a human or a tree to be an axiom, then I guess what I'm trying to get at is it would be not that we're trying to present an argument, but it would be an argument for the necessity of the existence of God or the infinite based on how we accept the concreteness of the finite around us. If we accept everything around us, this building, ourselves, the table as concrete,
Right.
but they're all finite, then whatever that finite is depending on, the infinite, must be not only as equally as concrete, but like more so. And if it's concrete, then it can't just, exist, whether, it's not just an axiomatic existence, it would seem it's beyond an axiom.
Yeah, so I absolutely understand what you're saying, but I also understand you're coming at this as a person of faith.
Yeah, sure.
So I would say the faith is the axiomatic, the faith in God is the axiomatic, but it's that faith that then supports the existence of God. Whereas if you don't have that faith, we can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. So I would argue, and probably everyone in this room agrees with you because we're all people of faith, but there is, somebody who does not have an innate faith, might give some pause to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, where I'm coming from is that there is no room for argument. I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong. I'm saying there's no room for argument because you have a belief structure. Your belief structure is no God. I have a belief structure. My belief structure is based on God.
Except they're operating
operating in completely different worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true.
And so while there's many things we can argue about as human beings, arguing faith, it makes no sense.
Yeah, you're right.
It is purely to put it in the terms of mathematics, two mathematically different worlds.
Yeah, it's a matter of the heart.
Yeah, I mean that's where we end, I guess.
I also had a question about more mathematically oriented.
Yeah.
So one of the chapters in the book that we've been reading for the club, the third chapter deals with says the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and the natural sciences based off of Eugene Wigner's essay from the 1960s. And so the author presents like some skepticism about the degree to which math corresponds to the natural objects themselves or just not simply because it's not simple, but just as a relationship between the human mind and the object. Because when you take a ping pong ball and you have three, or an apple, and you take three of them, that three is for our mind to help organize what we're
That's
looking
right.
at.
Yeah,
But what does, I mean, so that's also saying you have one, 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 these are three things, three identities, and you're saying 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Thanks for joining us. But when you take an apple, three apples, different masses, different weights, different coloration, so it's not, it doesn't fit the category of one because it's not an identity with the other.
right.
So
And I think what, that kind of goes back to the triangles, where the concept of three,
Okay.
threeness
I see.
makes sense. But
You draw.
when you look at those three pictures as opposed to these three ping pong balls, they are representing very, very different things.
Yeah.
But threeness is a mathematical concept,
Yeah.
the act of being three. So like my proudest moment as a mom, I think I probably told this in one of my classes, is I had a little girl, she was probably 4 years old, in the back of the car, and she said to me, I was driving, and she was like, Mama, I just figured out. What's that, Lydia? 3 is always equal to 3. I was like, this is an enormously important concept in mathematics,
Identity.
because those three pictures are not the same as these three balls, but 3
So
is always equal to 3, right? And so, and I, of course, I was just me being cute and funny with her and made a huge deal, but it's true, like she, in her brain, discovered, right, the identity property of mathematics,
Yeah.
right? Like at 4, like that's a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
That's a big deal. So, yeah, I think that going back to that example about is math perfect, it's only perfect here. And so when we use it to describe things here, we lose some of that perfection.
And now that kind of raises one concern, though, for research going on where they're trying to make mathematical models of cells, let's say, and devoting like billions of dollars of resources to make a mathematical model of a cell because they think the mathematical model of the cell will tell you how to cure a disease based on its deficiency. But something like a cell, which is cognitive and relational, is beyond just its
Yeah,
physical properties.
So any model we make ever, no matter how simple, is always going to be imperfect. So like even just somebody's batting average, it's not going to be a perfect model. We can't take into consideration every variable that's coming at it. And that seems very like sort of static, right? Something like throwing a baseball. But every time they throw it, the number of factors impacting it change and morph, and it's always changing. So we can never model anything perfectly. The best we can ever do is come close. And that idea of closeness changes depending on what it is. So is air resistance all that big when you're throwing a baseball? We probably don't have to account for it, right? But on this, like a molecule level, now we have to be more precise because we're dealing with things that are much smaller and more relational, right? And so, yeah, I mean, no model's perfect, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't model. We should absolutely model. That's how we're going to learn about the world.
Okay. Our friend Alex has joined from his home. Alex, do you have any contributions?
Not at the moment. I'm kind of like enamored by all your analogies. They're really good. I'm learning a lot.
And I probably should have prefaced this, and maybe I did a little bit, but I'm not an expert in this. I didn't go to school for this. This is just, I went to school to be a mathematician, but not to study it from the perspective of faith. This just came about because Tasvia is in my classes. I've used the understanding of an axiom. I didn't bring ping pong balls, but in the class. And so she talked to Krishna, and that's how this came about. I don't have an agent, and I don't go on tour talking about math and faith.
You should.
This is
Pretty good at it.
a one-off kind of, this is how I think about faith in relation to math.
I think it's an important perspective for people to be exposed to, for real. My humble opinion. So do you guys have any feedback or any kind of, do you want to see the conversation go in any other direction?
No, I thought it was valuable.
Valuable?
It was informative. It was just good to learn and hear other people's thoughts on
Awesome.
Now you know a little more math.
it.
And we definitely appreciate, everyone opening up about their faith. I mean, that's an intimate subject, no doubt. So
Yeah.
talking about it publicly is, kudos, we respect everyone's perspective very much. So,
And we greatly appreciate your time. That was awesome.
Thank you. I took more
Yeah.
time than I was, than I asked for, so sorry about that.
so now for you all, next meeting that we have, we're gonna go into the third chapter of the book that we've been studying. And so the topic is the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and the natural sciences. And just see what that chapter has to offer coming from a philosophical perspective and considering how math and nature fit from the book's perspective. If you're interested in joining that, you're welcome to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, I appreciate it very much.
Of course, yeah, I'm very
This is awesome. All right. So Alex, we're gonna shut it down, okay?
So your PowerPoint. you
problem.
present-
Yes. I know.
Thank you for having me. It was really a
Thanks for
pleasure
coming,
to be here
Alex.
again.
Take
All
care.
right, see you guys. Have a good one.
You too.
It's the